I was fortunate enough to find there are always good Haggadahs out there. So a few years ago they came out with a Haggadah from Rav Zalman. I was fortunate enough to find there are always good Haggadahs out there. So a few years ago they came out with a Haggadah from Rav Zalman Saratsky, who was a Rav in Yerushalayim in the early half of the 20th century. He lived through both World War I and World War II, and he was a Rav there. And the reason I was excited to see it, I didn't know who he was for a while, but I remember when my first trip to Israel with my parents, we stayed on Rehov Tzaratzkin in Yerushalayim. So I always remember the name of the city, the name of the street, and then it turned out that he was actually somebody I would end up reading his Svarim, so that was nice too. So he has some great Svarim on the Parsha, and they published a Haggadah recently, and in the back of the Haggadah there, they have a series of sermons, of drushos that he gave in Shul in Yerushalayim during the Pesach season for a bunch of years. So one of the drushas he has was a drusha, I think it was either 1945 or 46, I don't remember. He basically is giving this drusha in the aftermath of the Holocaust. And he poses some very important questions about Yetzias Mitzrayim and very important philosophical questions about Judaism in general. So he starts out, I don't have a sitter in front of me, but no short sheets tonight. We say in davening, Vayotzei esamo Yisrael mitocham lecheirus olam, right? That God took the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim, mitocham, from within them, lecheirut olam. What does that mean? Eternal freedom. So the question you can only ask if you're a survivor, the question you can only ask in 1945, is how can we describe Exodus from Egypt as an eternal freedom? If Jews have gone through so many difficult things throughout history, how can we call it a Cheirus Olam? How can we call it eternal freedom? We're not eternally free. We go through periods of freedom and then periods of subjugation, and periods of freedom and periods of slavery, and then and then a Holocaust, and then one after the next, after the next, after the next. Jewish history is constantly full of ups and downs. We build the Beis Hamikdash gets destroyed, and now we sit down. And you can imagine him saying this. This is what struck me the most. In 1945, you have a rabbi in Yerushalayim saying, I'm going to sit down at the Seder, I'm going to sit down in the Warsaw Ghetto, and I'm going to say to myself, thank God I'm free. Thank God I can, right? Harei anu uvanenu, we see ourselves, we say in the Haggadah, we see ourselves as free people. So he said, and this is a chilling question, would you rather not be a slave in Egypt than be in a gas chamber in Auschwitz? It's definitely not an easy question to answer. What would you prefer? But it's hard to celebrate Cheirus in 1944. It's hard to celebrate Cheirus in 1945. And that's something we say in davening every day. We celebrate that God took us out to an eternal freedom when physically our freedom is not exactly eternal, or it hasn't been yet. That was his first question. The second question he asks is more of a Chumash question, but it's an interesting one. The question is, when did the Jewish people come out of Egypt? First of all, by day or by night?
Day.
It's interesting. It kind of says, it says Be'etzem Hayom, which it also says by Avraham, which implies in the middle of the day when everyone would see, no one would stop them. But there are also indications that it was at night also. So the Gemara goes back and forth about it. But what was the season? Right, that's just my focus. What season?
Aviv.
Chodesh Aviv. How many times does the Torah say Chodesh Aviv? Ki b'Chodesh Aviv yatzasa mitzrayim. Right? Over and over and over. Who cares? Who cares the Jewish people went out in the spring? That's a legitimate question.
What do you mean?
So Rashi over there says, Rashi quotes,
of course it's important.
Rashi quotes, it's important because there's good weather. That's what Rashi says, right? God could have taken you out in the rain, He could have taken you out in the cold, could have taken you out in the snow. So it's chesed, right? What does this remind you of? Yosef. We're going to get back to Yosef. What happens with Yosef? Right? The smell. So it's a very, very difficult Rashi there also. Yosef is sold down to slavery by his brothers. And the Torah says that the merchants that he was sold to, they sell nechos utzri valot. They sell different kinds of herbs and spices. So Rashi says, here we see Shivchan Shel Tzadikim. You want to know how great the praise, the reward of the tzaddik is? That when he gets sold into slavery, the caravan doesn't smell bad.
That one?
Doesn't smell bad.
No comparison to this with being free. So
Hold on, all right. So what does that mean? So it's interesting. So there's what to say about that. It goes back to the discussion about the names and the names of the shvatim and the way. Right. Rashi also says, this is a tangent, but Rashi says by Yosef specifically, it works out nicely. That what does Rachel name? She names him Yosef. Why? Asaf Elokim et cherpati. Right? We talked about this once before, maybe.
Yeah.
Right? That Asaf Elokim et cherpati. God has taken away my shame. So Rashi says, what does that mean? Because when things break in the house and your husband's not home and he comes home and he asks you what happened to the vase, it's in shambles on the floor, right? So what do you say? You have nothing to say. You have no kids to blame it on. But when you have a kid, you say he did it.
Really?
So first of all, is that a good strategy for Shalom Bayis? I have no comment. I don't know.
Or for parenting.
Or for parenting, it's not a good strategy either.
But this is what Rachel was doubting for.
So this is what Rachel. This is what she wants. This is the woman who is barren, who is competing with her sister, who has, who gave up her marriage initially, and then she finally gets to marry Yaakov, and she can't have kids, and a miracle. She has a child, right? Thank God I can blame things on my son. So the teretz is, what's the teretz? Wait, one more. In brachos in the morning, we thank God for all these different things. He gives us the ability to stand up straight. He gives us this. He gives us that. We thank God for intelligence, right? How do we thank God for intelligence? Which means?
That the rooster who has no brain, he has no brain at all.
The rooster
can
distinguish between night and day because he crows when the sun rises. So thank you, God, for creating intelligence of a chicken. Right? How about thank you for creating science? How about thank you for creating people that could get us on the moon? How about thank you for creating people that have the knowledge to build a machine that can produce matzahs fast enough to service the entire Jewish community? Right? Cell phones that can text message to Israel in an instant. Thank you, God, for creating chickens that know when the sun rises. So what my Rebbe in Karen B'Yavneh said, Rav Rivlin used to say, was that it's not that we thank God for the best things that He's created, but we always make sure to praise God for the first possible opportunity. The first opportunity to praise God in the morning is when you hear the rooster crow. The first opportunity, the first difference between having a child, the difference between having a child in the home and not having a child in the home is that sometimes there are two people and sometimes there's one. Is Rachel going to thank Hashem because Yosef is the savior of the Jewish people? He is the one that protects them in Egypt. He is the one that saves them from starvation. She's going to thank him for that, absolutely. But let's not go so far. Don't skip steps. Make sure every step of the way you say thank you, one after the next. That's Yosef, right? So Rashi says, thank God. How do we get onto this topic? Thank God that it smells good in the caravan, right? That it has a nice aroma. So that's a very difficult Rashi, what exactly that means. And now you have the same thing, the Jewish people. Thank God that the Jewish people are getting out of Mitzrayim and the weather is good. I assure you, if I was in Egypt, I would have been happy to go out in the winter. Right? So how do you explain
But they
this?
wouldn't have.
Why not?
Because they complained about the weather.
Oh, that's a good
They would
answer.
have
Right.
complained about the weather.
Maybe they would have, that's true. Okay, so
We would have also.
What do you mean we were there? You were. You
okay,
complained.
so maybe we're going to use the board. There are going to be a couple of visuals, the camera will forgive me, but I think just to make the point, we're going to do a couple because there are these plays on words. So we're going to do a whole bunch of tonight. Okay. No one's going to be able to see that, right?
Doesn't work.
No. What about the other ones?
So say bracha.
We have plenty.
Okay, hold on. Oh, this is good,
It's not good. It's right. Get it normal.
Yeah, go get me one.
It's fine. Now you all know that my handwriting is terrible. This is the word I want to focus on right here. This pasuk describes I'm sorry if you can't read it.
Yeah.
This pasuk should describe when Moshe comes down from Har Sinai, he brings down the 10 Commandments, right? the Torah describes it as Mechtav Elokimhu. It is the writing of God. Charus al haluchos. What does charus mean?
Engraved.
Charut means engraved. Right? So the Gemara makes the following
That's you say.
comment.
You wrote charuch, which means bird.
No, he
Should be a tough.
It's a tough.
Charuch.
How else can you pronounce this word?
Chayrus.
You
Charuch.
can pronounce this word Beirut. What does that mean?
Freedom.
Freedom. The same word that means to engrave means freedom.
Engrave is with tet.
And
Chavita.
and the Mishnah says,
Of course
and
we
it's
do.
okay. So the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, what's this coming to tell you? That it's engraved in the writing of God. What's the difference? So it says that Ein lecha ben chorin, you don't have a free person, elamisha osek b'Torah, except for someone that studies Torah. Ein lecha ben chorin, elamisha osek b'Torah. Charas, the engraving of the Torah, makes a person free. Engraving and freedom, it's all the same thing, the engraving of the Torah. So here is where Reb Sorotskin works his way back to answer all his questions. And he says, what is freedom?
Torah.
When we celebrate freedom on Pesach, that God took us out of Egypt, what are we celebrating? And he says, it's not a physical freedom. Because if it was a physical freedom, we wouldn't be able to celebrate it when we're not free. You wouldn't be able to celebrate that in the ghetto. You wouldn't be able to celebrate that when you personally are impoverished or things like that. Charas, he says, Chayros, is a spiritual freedom. We talked about this last week, we mentioned it. The idea that in Mitzrayim, the labor that God puts us through is called avodah. Right? Avodah means busy work. And when the Jewish people go to build the Mishkan for Hashem, it's described as milacha, it's described as work. Right? So what's the difference between the work of God, the work we do for God, and the work that we do when we build the Mishkan, and when we work for Paro? The difference is that when we worked for Paro kept us busy. It wasn't about pyramids, right? The Lo Shamu al Moshe, the Torah says the people didn't listen to Moshe. Why? Mikotzer ruach u'me'avodah kasha. They were busy. They were stressed out. They had too much going on at work. They couldn't focus. Avodah is busy work. And Melacha is constructive. Melacha is what we're not supposed to do on Shabbos because it's accomplishing things. Melacha is what you do when you work for God. You're trying to achieve. You're trying to be a success. That's what Paro tried to keep us from. And Chayros isn't freedom, but Chayros is the ability to achieve. That's what Rav Sorotskin says. And he says, when in the year do you see a stark contrast between those who achieve and those who choose not to? That's Chodesh Aviv.
That's what?
Chodesh Aviv, that's the springtime. He said it's not about the good weather. Good weather, fine. Maybe there were people that would have been upset if the weather wasn't good. But he says when the snow melts and the trees start to blossom and all those things that you planted long ago start to come up, those crops start to pop up through the soil, you have two options. You can celebrate the good weather with vacation, or you can roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty, and start, providing for your family. And he says that's what Chodesh Aviv is all about. He says it's about the opportunity to achieve. God didn't take us out of Egypt for a vacation, right? God took us out of Egypt, and we immediately started counting the days towards Har Sinai, counting the days towards we can accept the Torah. He said that experience, this national freedom, the revelation that the Jewish people had at Yam Suf, that whole thing is also a preparation for achieving Torah, for the Charas al Haluchos, those letters that were engraved. Like Barry said before, what's the difference between writing and engraving? The engraving can't be erased. You can scratch the ink off a Sefer Torah even. You can erase a pencil. You can scratch off the ink. You can't remove engraving. You can put a Jewish person through all the ups and all the downs of life, but they'll always be chayras because they have charas. They'll always be free because they can always accomplish. This goes back to Viktor Frankl's psychology that we spoke about a few months ago. But that's what Rav Sorotskin saw, and that's what he celebrated on Pesach. He said that when we go through the Seder experience, we should realize the opportunity that we have ourselves and our families to accomplish.
So is that counted as the Omer performance?
I think so, right? That's why Machras HaShabbos has to mean from day 2 of Pesach. It can't mean from It's right from the beginning. We're immediately counting. We're always focused. I think it was the Ramban that describes the entire process of counting Sphira, those days between Pesach and Shavuot. He describes the whole thing as Chol HaMoed, right? right? Pesach is the first days of Yom Tif, Shavuos is the end game, that's the last days of Yom Tif, and everything else in between is Chol HaMoed. Right? It's one big holiday because you can't separate the two. And that's what we were doing. That's what Cherus is. Cherus, freedom, is intrinsically linked with our ability to study Torah and our ability to grow from Torah and to bring meaning into our lives.
So therefore, going back to your example in the cats, they did have to do the Seder because it's a spiritual freedom, not physical freedom, the fact that in the cat. But so therefore...
Right, that's exactly what Rosh Hashanah was trying to say, that no matter what happens to us, we have to hold strong in our faith, and that's our job. Now, to say that here, sitting comfortably in Toronto with a fireplace, that's easy to say. But it does really raise the question of what are we celebrating? Are we here to celebrate physical freedom? You know, I was thinking, I might have mentioned this, I'm not sure, with everything that was going on in the Middle East recently, with all the politics, and I'm not a politician, I'm not an expert on these things at all, but one thing that struck me, and you can totally disagree if you choose to, but does anybody here feel that when we talk about Egypt, we have a little bit of a different reaction than when we talk about anywhere else?
Yeah.
There's something, you heard, who was the person that said, you know, we built your pyramids once and we're not going to build them again? You know, right? People, why do we do that? We are like, it's not, the average Jew doesn't feel like he was freed from Egypt. Maybe he does. You know, it's like we feel like Egypt enslaved us. We don't feel that Spain kicked us out. Right? We had enough places on the map where Jews have been, you know, expelled from, that, you know, we could have hatred towards, or a little resentment, or kind of in the back of our minds. And first, Egypt has this prominent role.
Maybe that's the success of the Seder over all these years.
So even better, right? The Seder, absolutely, but even better. We mentioned once before, the Ramban asked this question. He says, why is it that we can't get past Egypt? He didn't, you know, ask it in this exact way. But Kiddush on Friday night, Zechel Yetzias Mitzrayim, Tefillin, Zechel Yetzias Mitzrayim. There are very few mitzvos that you can't connect to Yetzias Mitzrayim, let's be frank. Yeah, this is all Yetzias Mitzrayim, right? Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your God. Who what? Who created the world, who created man, who revealed himself to Abraham? No, the God who took you out of Egypt. We can't get past Egypt. And the Ramban says that the reason for that is because Egypt was an undeniable miracle. Physically, no explanation. You cannot explain frogs. You cannot explain blood. You cannot explain Kriyas Yamsuf. You definitely can't explain all of them in total. And he says, from those miracles, we're supposed to see that everything that happens in life is a miracle. Some are more obvious and some are less obvious, but if we remember those things, if we remember them, then we start to see that the way that God interacts with us constantly is miraculous as well. And he says that's why we constantly bring it up. And I think it's been effective. We know what happened in Egypt. We feel to a certain extent a certain connection with Egypt. At least I think so. More than, and we saw it here with this whole political uprising. And it's really interesting that we should take that and start to live that cherus that we were talking about. To see that not just as a physical freedom, but that was the experience that created the Jewish nation. They went in as a family of 70 people. They came out of Egypt as a nation, and that nation was on a mission. It started with Pesach, it ended with Kabbalas HaTorah, and that's where we move forward. And we have a mission, and that mission isn't, you know, as much as it's fixed in Eretz Yisrael, that you can fulfill that mission when they're outside of Eretz Yisrael. And wherever he is, no matter how bad or how good the situation, we're always challenged to be constructive, to perform milacha rather than avodah.
I think that you've just said it, but what I was going to suggest is that the Jewish people were created for Egypt. So it's not, and maybe it is, maybe Egypt was different from all the other exodus, all the kickings out. But it's also the basis of our creation. Hashem said we'd be enslaved in Egypt and then be taken as a people. So none of the other leaving of persecution resulted in the creation of us as a people.
Right. Okay. That was point number one. That was maybe the definition, one definition of freedom. Go back to the board for a second. This is a board plan. Maybe it's better than sheets for this situation. Okay. A couple of these are famous, but they're interesting to look at. I'm not gonna. Let's do
Use
it.
the purple.
The Torah tells us, "Ushmartem es ha-matzos." You should guard your matzahs. This is where shmura matzah, right? You should make sure the matzah doesn't become chametz. Now we have this word here, ha-matzot, right? Vision Rebbe I saw this week. The Vision Rebbe says ha-matzot is the exact same gematria as anybody?
Mitzvot?
Ha-mitzvot, right here. Ha-mitzvot is the exact same
Ha-mitzvot.
gematria as Yisrael. So there's what to think about there, but leave that as it may. When you look at this word in the Torah, shmartem et hamatzot can also be read as mitzvot, right? If we were to write that out in modern Hebrew, if you would see it, you would see mitzvot with two vavs, just so that you know it says mitzvot. But really it's only mitzvahs with one vav, so ha-mitzvot. You can read it ha-matzot, ha-mitzvot. So the Gemara derives a principle. The Gemara says, just like we have a responsibility to make sure that our matzah does not become chametz, just like you have a responsibility to guard your matzah, you also have a responsibility to guard each and every mitzvah that you perform. Don't let it pass by. Don't miss the opportunity. You've got 18 minutes to make sure the matzah is baked and it hasn't risen. The same exact responsibility with every single mitzvah. I saw once a suggestion that there are certain mitzvahs that are one mitzvah specific. They only apply, the mitzvah of tzitzis is only about tzitzis, or whatever you want it to be. But there are some mitzvahs that have these meta mitzvah kind of implications. Example, case in point, para aduma, the red heifer. The Torah says, Zos chukas ha-Torah. This is the chok of the Torah. It doesn't say this is the chok, which means a law that we don't understand. It doesn't say this is the chok of the para. It says Zos chukas ha-Torah. So what does that mean? So what it means is, it means that every mitzvah that we have has a component of chok, something mysterious in it. As much as we think we understand every mitzvah that we do, there's always another level to it, the intention that God had behind it that we'll never fully grasp. And that's why para is kind of the model, the red heifer is the model for the idea in general of chok. So matzah is a general principle. The way we interact with the mitzvah of matzah, that caution, the way that we deal with it so quickly and zealously, that's how we're supposed to deal with every single mitzvah. Just like matzah shouldn't become chametz, make sure to bake it chick-chock. Same thing with every mitzvah you do. Don't let it pass by. Do it as quickly as you can. What does that sound like to you? Any other principle that sounds just like that? Just like matzah, you're supposed to do it. Make sure to watch the matzah and bake it as quickly as possible. So too, don't let other mitzvahs become chametz. That principle, to do mitzvahs as quickly as possible. Any of the parents in the room that have ever made a bris, right? Make the bris early in the morning. Why?
Vayashkem Avraham b'boker.
Vayashkem Avraham b'boker. We learn from there. We're supposed to be zealous in our performance of mitzvahs. So the Torah Tamima asks the question. He says, what's the difference between these two principles? The Gemara says, you learn from matzah that you're supposed to bake your matzahs quickly. You're supposed to do all your mitzvahs as quickly as possible. What's the difference between that rule and the rule we learned from Abraham?
You didn't talk about doing them as quickly as possible. You talked about a shmira, like doing it.
So that's what he says. Right. So he starts with that. And he says the difference between zrizos and chimas in this context, between zealousness and making sure the bread doesn't leaven or other mitzvahs don't leaven, proverbially, the difference is that if you leave matzah, it doesn't just pass you by, it becomes chametz. But zrizos is just about doing things quickly. And he says further, and this is a very interesting idea, that zrizos, you may or may not be zealous in performance of a mitzvah. You want to do a bris for your son early in the morning, so you're going to schedule it at the 6:15 minyan, right? 6:15 minyan, whatever. And then the minyan's over at 7 o'clock, and you're ready to go, and the mohel doesn't show up. Mohel comes at 11, right? So were you zaris? Were you not zaris? You weren't zaris. The mitzvah wasn't done at 7 a.m. It was done at 11 a.m. You missed the boat. Over. Then you do the mitzvah. You still did the mitzvah. You just didn't have that additional external component, doing it as quickly as possible. Right. It's not. It's like a hit or mitzvah. To do it in the best possible way. Shmartem es hamatzos is a principle that applies to the mitzvah. If you're going to do it, it's going to have to be done with shmirah. It's not a hither. It's part of. It's not a hither.
Either it's
do it right,
be a matzah or it's not going to be a matzah.
Did you do it right or did you not do it right? And his best example, we were talking about be'etzem hayom, is from Abraham himself. And it's actually bris milah. What does it say about the bris that he did on Yishmael? Be'etzem hayom hazeh nimol Abraham v'Yishmael beno. When did Abraham do his bris? Not at the 6:15 minyan. Abraham did it at the middle of the day, just like Be'etzem, the Jewish people left in the middle of the day. Why? So the whole world should see that he was performing this mitzvah. What about Abraham is the Vayashkim Abraham Babokir. He is the zealous Jew. He doesn't sleep the night before mitzvah. So why is he waiting around? And that's what the Torah Tzemima says, that there are times to be zealous and there are times not to be zealous. And Ushmartem es hamatzos teaches us that it's not about doing mitzvahs as quickly as possible, but it's doing mitzvahs in the best possible way. And that's something that we learn from matzah. The principle about matzah in general.
I think it's completely different. The matzah, if you don't watch the matzah, then it's not a matzah. It's a timing. It has to be 13 minutes, right? Since you start the process till it's finished. If you missed half a second or 2 seconds after, it's already lechem. It's not a matzah. Where for a brit,
right, it's right.
There's no timer, you know. Right. This is like open heart surgery here.
There is a discussion. There is a discussion about bris milah. Difference between doing the bris on the 8th day versus doing it on the 9th day or beyond then. There's a specific value to the 8th day. You know, the 8th day you can even do it on Shabbat.
So you still do the mitzvah. You still can do the brit. Right. There's still going to be a mitzvah of the brit, but there is no way that if you did the matzah after 20 minutes, that the matzah will be matzah.
What Rav Hutner wants to say, Rav Hutner in the Pachad Yitzchak talks about this principle, and he asks, so what does it show about a person that has the opportunity to do a mitzvah and just lets it float? And they say, what's the difference? I'll do it today, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it the day after. And he says, that's the point here. He says, the mitzvah is tainted. If a person says, I'll do a mitzvah when it comes around, when I get around to it, I'll do it when the game is over, whatever it is, it's not the same mitzvah as when a person says, I have an opportunity here to do something amazing, I'm going to jump on it. And he says, that's something that we get from here also. Matzah is a funny thing, right? Matzah, on the one hand, we say, this is lechem oni, this is the bread of the impoverished person, right? And at the same time, we eat matzah because ki v'chi pazon yatzata miMitzrayim. The Jewish people left so quickly, right, that they didn't have time for their bread to rise. So what is it? That's a great question to ask in terms of the Seder. What is matzah? Is matzah the poor man's bread, or is matzah the free man's bread? What's the symbolism of matzah? And if you say that it's both, I think it's very fascinating. If you say that matzah functions both as a reminder of our terrible atrocities that took place to the Jewish people, and it also is a celebration of freedom, so essentially what we're saying is matzah is what you make of it. Matzah is in the eyes of the beholder, if you will. Right? That's something I think to ponder. You know, Paul already left, but on Sunday we had a shiur of the Shul a couple blocks away on Gebrachs. The minhag that some people don't use matzah when they cook, right? Matzah doesn't rise once it's been baked, so you can grind it up into matzah meal and bake with it. And some people have a tradition of not using it. Maybe they'll be part of the matzah that wasn't baked 100%. It's a long discussion exactly why. So they don't eat matzah balls on Pesach. They won't cook with matzah meal, etc., etc. So we talked about why people are so neurotic when it comes to matzah. They're so passionate. And the Gemara says in Brachos that there was a certain Rabbi Alexander, who used to say the following prayer when he finished davening. And he would say to God, he would say, you know and I know that I want to accomplish the will of the Creator. But some things are getting in my way. And he says, what? What gets in my way? Shibud Malchios, the fact that we're subservient to foreign governments that don't let us practice religion the way we want to, and seor shebe'isa, and the yeast in dough. So what's that all about? And then he says, may it be your will that these two things don't interfere with my life, so that I can fulfill the will of God. So he's blaming the government. Okay, that's fine, right? We don't have any problem with that. And he's blaming yeast.
Right?
He's blaming yeast.
Hashem made the yeast.
So Rashi says on that Gemara that the yeast in bread is symbolic of the Yetzer Hara, but doesn't say why. So what I thought, what I think I've heard before, is what yeast does is it takes the physical components of the bread that you have and it distorts them. Think about when you take, if you bake something in your house, the fact that you take it and you shape it into a certain shape. You stick it in the oven, and when it's done, you pull it out. It doesn't look anything like you put it in. You put in a little braided piece of dough, and it comes out as a big challah. Or you put it in light, and it comes out dark. That's a different thing. The yeast takes everything that already exists, and it distorts it legamri, as we say. Distorts it 100%. That's what yeast does. When you put matzah in the oven, what does it look like? A flat piece of dough. What does it look like when it comes out? A burnt flat piece of dough. It's the exact same thing. You can point at it and say, that's my matzah, I just baked that. But the challah looks a little bit different. And that's the way the Yetzer Hara operates. The Yetzer Hara takes everything we have in this world. Everything we have in this world is for a good thing, right? If God didn't want it here, He wouldn't have created it, right? And somehow, what do? We don't create things out of thin air. That's not where our problem is. It's the way we prioritize the things that we have. That's the Yetzer Hara working. The Yetzer Hara is saying my job is more important than my family. The Yetzer Hara says that money and pride are more important than my study of Torah, right? They take all these real values and it just distorts them. And it makes the important ones less important and the less important ones more important. That's how the Yetzer Hara operates. And symbolically, that's what's going on on Pesach. That we're neurotic about chametz because we're trying to wipe out the Yetzer Hara. That's what the Gemara in Brachos is trying to get at. That was Rav Alexandri's approach. So that's something to think about in terms of this matzah issue. Is matzah the poor man's bread, or is matzah the free man's bread? And maybe the point is matzah, you're supposed to look at it, you're supposed to see what it really is. Matzah can be different things for different people, but you're supposed to see it as matzah is everything. It's consistent. Matzah is always the same, and yet somehow it functions as both. So I don't know, it's something to think about in terms of matzah. Finally, I want to ask a few questions about the Seder. Okay. Kadesh, we make Kiddush. Orchatz, we wash, right? Yachatz, we karpas, thank you. We dip a vegetable into salt water, and then Yachatz, we break the middle matzah, right? Then Magid, then we go on to the Pesach story. What's this whole business about? Dipping things in water, breaking the matzah in half. And if these are parts of the Seder, why parts of the story, why are they coming before the story? Right? If we're going to start with the action, so eat matzah and then talk about what happened. Eat maror and then talk about what happened. We break the matzah, we dip the vegetable into salt water, and then we move on. Very strange. Furthermore, the reason we do karpas is why? Dip the vegetable in? Anybody? So that the kids will ask what we're doing, right? Right? That's what we do. So that the kids, right? Why is this night different? Why tonight are we dipping things in salt water, right? Why dipping a vegetable in water? There are a lot of weird things you could do to get your kids' attention. You could be nice to them, give them candy, right? That would surprise them. I'm just kidding, right? And instead, you want to surprise your kids, so you take half a piece of potato and you dunk it in salt water, and that'll get their attention. That's what we're doing. Is that an old-fashioned game, or is there something more to it? So, Rav Meir Goldvich, Rosh Hashiva in Shiva University, he made the following suggestion. He says, where do we know karpas from, besides the Seder? This is an unbelievable find. You have to be really good at Rashi. I immediately thought of the Megillah.
Yeah.
Chor karpas u'scheles. Karpas is a color, right?
So Megillat Esther.
So Megillat Esther. Going back to Yosef, this is really a Yosef shir by the time we're done with it.
Give you a chance to redeem yourself.
Exactly. So, Yaakov, oh that's true, this is going to go well. This is going to go very well for me. This is going to be a good one that I can take a break for like a month. Exactly. So wait, Yaakov, Yosef is favored by his father. And the way we know that is that he gives him this technicolored coat, if you will, right? He gives him his kisones pasim, right? Rashi doesn't say it's technicolored. Rashi says, what color is it?
Right.
Come on. Barry's listening. Karpas. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, Lashon kli milas kimo karpas uschelas. He says it's like karpas. It's the same word as the Megillah. Got to know this Rashi. Parak Lamed Zayin. The first time.
Say that the karpas in the Megillah is not the vegetable. It's something else.
It's a color. It's like a bluish color.
Right.
Right. And then he gives other interpretations. Medrash Agad al Shem Tsarosav Shinim Karla Potiphar. Okay, fine. Rashi gives a second interpretation. Kisones pasim. That's where he gets it from. Pasim is karpas. Pei samach. Karpas pasim.
Yeah.
What do the brothers do after they sell Yosef?
They dip it in.
They dip his coat into blood. So said Rav Goldvick, something unbelievable. The way we start the Pesach story is to recognize how we ended up in Egypt. And he says we ended up in Egypt because the brothers couldn't get along. We ended up in Egypt because they dunked his coat in blood and lied to their father about how Yosef supposedly died. That division in the family, that division within the Jewish people, is where the Pesach story begins. What do? We do karpas. We dip it in the salt water, right? The bitter waters of the fight between Yosef and his brothers. And then what do? And we break the matzah. What do? The exact same thing. We take the matzah and we break it in half. Both the same thing. He says the whole story is about Achdas. Now, so in the Vision Rabbi has this whole series of gematrios about this pasuk of Vishmartem es hamatzos. He talks about hamatzos is the same numerical value as Israel. He goes on and on. So he says, which is interesting, when we call out Kol dich ben yetze v'yechol, anyone who is hungry, let them come and eat. He says we're not talking about food. The Rebbe said we're talking about people that have an interest in learning about Judaism. The way that God took us out of Egypt even though we didn't deserve it. Who are we to create a disconnect between Jews that are observant and Jews that aren't observant? We don't have the right to do that. God didn't make that distinction. He took us all out of Egypt. Anybody that wanted to go was welcome. And that's what we do. We call out and we say anybody who's interested, anyone who has a desire, just like the Jewish people, all they had was faith. They still believed in God. They didn't practice anything. As long as you have that faith, as long as you're interested, as long as you're inspired, we want you at our table. That's what the Pesach story is about, reconnecting with the rest of the Jewish people that we've lost touch with over time. As an aside, I quoted my Rebbe Rav Rivlin from Karen Biavne before, so he asked a great question, which is a tangent, but on this same verse, he said, at what time of night do you call out Kol Dich Ben Yetze V'Yechol?
Midnight.
10 o'clock. By the time you get home from Shul and you start the Seder and you get to Magid and you say, anyone who's hungry, come and eat, your door is locked. There's nobody on the street. What are we doing?
We're calling to ourselves. So
that you could take the Vishnitzer Rebbe's approach and say that this is symbolic of reminding ourselves the importance of Achdus, of unity. But Rav Rivlin said something else, which I thought was very thought-provoking. And he said, just because people are sitting at your table doesn't necessarily mean that they feel welcome. You have families that get together that have issues, families that haven't seen each other in a long time, right? And they're sitting across the table from each other. One person is hosting when the other person wanted to host. Who knows what kind of stuff was going on getting ready for Pesach, right? And people are there, but they're not necessarily in the best of moods. And he said, Kol Dich Ben Yetze V'Yechol, we're one big family. Everybody's sitting at the same table. We're not talking to the people on the street. There's nobody left on the street. We're talking to each other at the Seder. That was his suggestion. So let's take this unity model a little bit further.
Well, we call Jackie Garber.
The Karban Pesach, which we don't have at our Seder, that sacrifice the Jewish people brought in Egypt that we continue to bring throughout the generations, a very important mitzvah, a mitzvah that if you don't perform it, you get kares. Right? One of the most severe punishments for not doing something that you should. Usually you only get serious punishments for doing sins. Here, the fact that you abstain gets you such a only by Karban Pesach and by Milah and circumcision, refusing to do those two mitzvos. Those are the two mitzvos. Why? Because those are really entrances into the Jewish community. Someone who says, I don't want to be part of that, so that comes with very serious consequences. What is the principle that applies to all the laws of the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach, that korban, when you shech that lamb, needs to be complete, 100%, not a single broken bone. You roast the entire animal whole. And who eats from it? Everything.
The Kohen.
Right? Who eats from it? The entire family. Right? And where do you eat it? B'bayis echad. It has to be eaten in one house. What does that mean? You can't say, like, one family all get together, brothers and sisters, they each take a piece and they go back to their own houses. Everyone needs to eat together. The Pesach reflects the unity that God was trying to create when taking Jewish people out of Egypt. He was trying to create one nation. So when a family or when a group of families get together, there can't be any division between them. Whoever's eating the animal, they need to eat the whole animal. They can't break off pieces. They can't go back to their own houses. They all have to eat. They all have to eat. No, it is. No, they're not. They won't eat. They won't eat the parts of it that aren't kosher. That's true. The point is, but they don't remove those. Right, but they don't remove. They don't break a single bone. They roast it with all the bones still in place. So the korban is all about unity. And what do we eat at the Seder that's kind of a reference to the Korban Pesach? The last thing we eat at the Seder is the afikomen. What's afikomen?
Half.
It's the half that we broke at the beginning of the Seder. The last thing that we eat, the reminder of what the Korban Pesach was, is the broken half of that matzah that we start our Seder with. We break it, and it's symbolic, like the karpas reminds us of the disconnect within the Jewish people, and the challenge through the Seder. As we have our Seder with those people who need a place to eat from the street, we have it with family, we have it with the Rasha, who sits at the table and doesn't want any part, he sits there too. What's the goal? To take the broken matzah that was hidden away, those Jews that were lost along the line, and find a way to bring it back to the table before the night is over. The entire Seder is all about the achdus of the Jewish people. Like the vision to Rabbi says, a Jew cannot achieve love of God until he first masters love of Israel. That's what the Rabbi says on this comment. And that's what Afikomen is all about. Just like the korban was supposed to be showing, we have to recognize that there was disconnect and that there is disconnect in the Jewish people. And the question is, how do we bring that back? And that's what the Afikomen is, because Afikomen is our reminder of the Korban Pesach, because we don't have a Korban Pesach to eat. And maybe that's exactly the point. We don't have a Korban Pesach because of that. Right? Of that sinas chinam, that baseless hatred between Jews. That's what causes the broken matzah. That's what causes the absence of the Pesach. And with that Afikomen, we try and bring it back. And you have to find a way. The way the Vision Rebbe says it, which I thought was very beautiful, is that as we go through the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and you think about how little merit the Jewish people had, different approaches to what merit we had in coming out. But the way he says it is all we had was faith. And that was good enough. And we look at the way that God chose to take us back, even though maybe he didn't have to. God saved us for no reason other than the fact that we were the Jewish people. He had a mission for us, he loved us, he saved us, even though all we had was a little bit of faith. And that's what he says is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to take the faith that God had in us and turn it towards the rest of the Jewish people. If God had faith in them, then we need to have faith in them also. And that's what the Seder is about. It's about the Bayis Echad. It's about trying to establish unity within